I didn't try anything.
Toss those out.
Is that working now?
Yeah.
That looks like it's a little bit more reliable. I see the little mic meter going up and down. All right. We'll hope that's okay. And if not, Penelope will let me know. So, oppression, right, violence, forcing you to take views, depriving of liberty. I think I would also probably put in deprive of property. Right? If someone uses a system to take from you what is yours in an illegitimate way, whether they use violence or not, I think most of us would consider that to be a form of oppression. Not as extreme as when they deprive me of life, but definitely something that is still oppressive.
Under force, the acceptance of their views would be control of the media.
Control. Which is, depending upon how you want to categorize it, a form of liberty that's been taken away, or the means by which liberty is taken away, or unfortunately a rather symbiotic system where you both take away and control simultaneously. Right, so oppression can be rather nasty. Oppression can also be on a micro level. It's not only large institutions, organizations, or governments that it can engage in oppression. So we are going to look at some narrow views of oppression and things that we actually have control over in our own actions in life. So we are in Behar-Bechukotai, a double parasha. We're going to be looking at a section from Behar, and we're going to go ahead and start off, excuse me, from the beginning on page 738, which is chapter 25. Since we have none of our regular reader volunteers, I'll need a reader volunteer for today, only for today. Michael, you've got the cough today, so you're. You've only got the Hebrew version. All right, process of elimination.
Where would you like me to begin?
Go ahead and start on 25, verse 1. The Lord spoke, and I will interrupt you from time to time.
The Lord spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai. Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when you enter the land that I assign to you, the land shall observe a Sabbath of the Lord. 6 years you may sow your field, and 6 years you may prune your vineyard and gather in the yield. But in the 7th year, the land shall have a Sabbath of complete rest, a Sabbath of the Lord. You shall not sow your field or prune your vineyard. You shall not reap the aftergrowth of your harvest or gather the grapes of your untrimmed vines. It shall be a year of complete rest for the land. But you may eat whatever the land during its Sabbath will produce, you, your male and female slaves, the hired and bound laborers who live with you, and your cattle and the beasts in your land may eat all its yield.
All right. So what we're talking about here, of course, is the sabbatical, as it's more commonly referred to. The idea, of course, that from sabbatical, you'll notice the root word for Shabbat, for the Sabbath, that this is a time of cessation of using the land, but instead allowing the land to rest the same way that we rest every 7 days with our own Shabbat. So that's the parallel that's occurring here. We're going to go ahead and move on, though, to see that it goes a little bit even more than that, because in verse 8, we're going to do a little math.
You shall count off 7 weeks of years, 7 times 7 years, so that the period of 7 weeks of years gives you a total of 49 years.
Right, so 7 sabbatical cycles together equals 49. Keep going.
Then you shall sound the horn loud in the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, the day of atonement. You shall have the horn sounded throughout your land, and you shall hallow the 50th year. You shall proclaim release throughout the land for all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you. Each of you shall return to his holding, and each of you shall return to his family. That 50th year shall be a jubilee for you. You shall not sow, neither shall you reap the aftergrowth or harvest the untrimmed vines, for it is a jubilee. It shall be holy to you. You may only eat the growth direct from the field.
All right. So in this 7x7 cycle, the Jubilee cycle, in addition to allowing the land to rest, there is a new instruction that's been added. What's novel here? What's happening for the people this time?
Return.
Return, right? People are returning to their holdings. So what the Jubilee was intended to do was to take all of the people during the 50 years, some of whom had been able to expand their holdings beyond what they had originally by purchase, some of which had lost their holdings during those 50 years by sale or for other reasons, that after 50 years, you hit the reset button and everyone goes back to where they started. It's the equivalent of playing the game of Monopoly, right? We've all played Monopoly at some point, whether you liked it or not. And you know that there are different games of Monopoly. And after you've played one game through, you put everything back in the box, and then you bring it out again next game, and you start with everybody being given the same amount of money that is the starting money, and then you start again. That was what the Jubilee was designed to do, right? So that you don't take and say, well, we've reached the end of the game of Monopoly, and one person has all the money and all the property, and we're just going to keep playing from now on with one person who has everything. No. You would put the pieces back, everybody would get their property again that they began with, and then you would go. This was meant to prevent an imbalance occurring from within the tribes so that no one tribe would be able to dominate all the others, but instead everyone would always be secure, knowing that no matter how bad they had been hurt by bad luck or bad choices, at least every 50 years, they and their families would be restored to a better starting place and go onwards from where they are.
So it literally meant their original plot of land that they were given to Israelites.
It originally meant whatever your family's holding had become due to inheritance and such. So it couldn't just be the original holding from the plot of land, because with the birth of more sons, the land would be divided, but the holding as it was meant to be by the inheritance law rather than by whatever economic fluctuations had changed things, that was what you would be returning to.
So not back to the beginning, but back to the last 50-year jubilee.
No, it would be back to wherever the beginning had been divided, as opposed to wherever the economy had distributed it. Right. So we can do a quick family tree, right? And I'll just do man has 2 sons. They each have 2 sons, right? So let's call this, year 0, year 50, and year 100. In the year 100 Jubilee, these guys each get their 4 holdings. They don't get the original holding of the first guy, but their holdings are determined based on that original holding.
So if 2 of those third generations,
right,
had more given their property to the other cousins,
right, or had sold it, or had an economic catastrophe and had sold themselves into slavery, at the 50 years, they would get back that parcel of land that was their due based on the laws of inheritance from the original that had been part of their tribal allotment. And this would be known of whose land this was. Because as we're going to see in the next section, when it comes to the land, the actual farming productive land, you don't sell the land. You lease the land to other people. And you're going to lease it based on where we are in the Jubilee cycle. Because obviously land that's leased at the beginning of the cycle can be used for more years, and land that's leased at the end of the cycle is going to have fewer years left to be used before it gets put back into the original owner's hands. Make sense? You look still like you're...
I'm still not quite getting it.
Well, it's a radical notion, so I mean, it's understandable.
I understand the concept,
Right.
I just don't understand the mechanics yet.
Okay.
I'll get it as you go on.
Oh, well, so, I mean, I'll try one more time as well, because if you're not getting it, then chances are others are having difficulty, whether they're here or online. So the idea would be the original man, he got this plot of land from his tribe when they first came into the land of Israel. And when he died, he divided it between his two sons so that they each had an equal amount. And then when they died, they divided it between their 4 sons. And so there are now 4 lots that are assigned, one to each of these 4 sons. But during the course of the economy of this cycle of Jubilee, let's say that one of the sons had to be sold as a slave because he was a master criminal that got caught and had to be sold to pay off his debts, and his land had to be sold in the process. And let's say this son over here redeemed that land, so he now owns 2/4, half of the total land. 50 years at the end of the Jubilee, and he goes back. Each have their 1/4 piece of the land.
Okay.
That make sense? Okay. Let's see a little bit more about that whole leasing thing as we're going to carry on from verse 13.
In this year of Jubilee, each of you shall return to his holding. When you sell property to your neighbor or buy from your neighbor, you shall not wrong one another. In buying from your neighbor, you shall deduct only for the number of years since the Jubilee, and in selling to you, he shall charge you only for the remaining crop years. The more such years, the higher price you pay. The fewer such years, the lower price. For what he is selling you is a number of harvests. Do not wrong one another, but fear your God, for I, the Lord, am your God.
Okay. So the basic math is as I sort of laid out, which is when you sell the land, you're not actually selling the land, you're selling a number of harvests, a number of opportunities to realize the gain of the produce of that land. And therefore, when you're selling it, you need to know, all right, we've got 10 years left of the Jubilee, so that means I'm going to have 1 sabbatical, and then the other years are going to be a harvesting year. You need to work out how many harvests are coming. And indeed, if you've been watching the Mishnah class, we went over that in an earlier class. You need to be very clear of, I am buying the harvest, or am I buying the land, including the sabbatical, in which case I'm paying for a year I can't use. You need to be very clear in those contracts. But that's what you're doing, is you're buying the use of the land for a certain period of time. And you need to be clear on exactly how much that time is. All right. Did you notice the term for oppression? All right. So tonu, right? Do not wrong yourself or wrong the others is used here, is often used as well in the sense of oppressing someone. But what's most unusual about that is not just the fact that there's a sense of wronging that's happening here, but that it is stated twice. And as you look at the handout, you'll see the 2 verses that we just read, verse 14 and verse 17. The same command seems to be given twice in rapid succession. Right? We find do not wrong one another, and then we hear do not wrong one another. And it seems odd of why would God have this repetition so close back to back. So that's what we're going to have to unpack. Sound good? All right. So from our first paragraph on the handout of the when you sell or buy, if you would mind reading.
When you sell or buy landed property, take into account how many years there are until the Jubilee, and according to the years and the crops of the field, which it can be expected to yield, shall the vendor sell and the purchaser buy. For in the end, he, the purchaser, will have to return it to him, the vendor, in the Jubilee year.
Right, so that's Rashi's take on that first verse 14, which is pretty much what we got from it as well, which is you're buying and selling based on the number of years of harvest available. He adds in a little bit more that, yeah, you have to also consider what the crops are and all of that. Because some land is better than other land. Some land is good for certain crops or bad for other crops. And some lands, when you make the deal, the guy may not want you to plant certain crops, because of what it will do to the soil. It's added in. And Sforno, however, comes in and says, well, there's an extra layer on top of this, a little bit more than just not wronging each other by miscounting the jubilees. So that's the next paragraph.
In any sale, it is forbidden to disadvantage the seller or the purchaser when the purchaser is unaware of the true worth of the merchandise, even if by then it had already come into his possession and he had an opportunity to show it to a friend who is more knowledgeable.
All right, so what he's describing here is the expansion of the idea that you are oppressing, you are wronging a person if you take advantage of them in any business transaction. And it's not just for the land where how many years are left for the harvest before the Jubilee. It can be for when I'm selling you my watch. And if I tell you this watch is an amazing watch and it's an antique or something and it's worth $500, but I'll let you have it for only $300. If I tell you that, I have wronged you because this is not a $300 watch by any stretch of the imagination. And when I do so, I am not just being a shrewd businessman, I am violating the Torah. I am going against the commandment. I am committing an act of oppression against someone else. And the Torah takes that very, very seriously.
So is he saying that you should bring in an honest broker?
Absolutely. Yeah, but he's saying that even if you went to an honest broker who agreed, if it turned out that they were mistaken, and that there was either deception or a misunderstanding about the true value.
As long as you do it, you only pay $25 for it.
Eventually, you can rescind the sale. The sale can be nullified if there was an absolute. It's not just deception. Sometimes it can just be finding a sucker, right?
Yeah.
So, if I tell you that this book is it costs $5,000. And you think, wow, $5,000, that's great for Torah. Even if you're okay with it, and obviously I'm okay with it, if it's later discovered that there's no way that a book like this would cost $5,000, you can come back to me and say, I want to nullify the sale. Right? That sale was made under a false understanding of the true value, even though it was just being a sucker. As opposed to me lying to you. I never told you it was an antique. I never said that you could sell it on eBay for $5,000. I never misrepresented what the book was. I just misrepresented its worth. That is still considered a problem under Jewish law.
Could you explain the converse? I can see that, but say you say it's $5, but it's a precious manuscript.
Right. You mean lying?
But you don't know. You just say it's $5. You don't realize that it has.
Yes. Oh, the opposite side. Yes.
I think that's more.
And that's where Sforno is kicking in very much at the beginning, where you can do this type of oppression, this wronging, both as the buyer or the seller. So we usually are more aware and on guard against unscrupulous sellers. So when you go into the used car lot, it's usually the seller that we are afraid of. That he's going to cheat the customer. But a customer can absolutely cheat and be in violation of this if they also take advantage of the seller. Did I say the seller twice? The buyer can absolutely also violate this by taking advantage of the seller. So if I walk into an antique store or walk into a garage sale, even better, and I see a precious manuscript sitting there and they've got it listed for $5 because to them it's an old bunch of paper, I'm not allowed to give them $5, walk out with it, and go woo, and run off and sell it on the manuscript market. I have to let them know that this is worth much more than $5, and therefore the price that they have put out it is inappropriate. And then I can still haggle within about a sixth of the actual price to try and get to a better deal for myself. But I cannot just simply take advantage of their ignorance. It's perhaps harder for us to realize that because we live in a very transactional and a very corporate sort of setting where most of us feel that there are these corporations that sell us things, and if we can get one up on them, hey, why not? But when you realize that the buying and selling is always within some system of a community, then taking advantage of someone else within the community is always going to be bad for the community. It may take longer in our corporate stock system for the bad to come back around and harm the community, but it's coming because someone just got cheated. And that's what the Torah is trying to prevent. And as Forno points out, that's happening in all cases. Okay, so that hopefully makes sense of why God wants us not to oppress each other in our buying and our selling. But it doesn't explain yet why we have 2 admonitions within 3 verses on what we're doing. Why does God repeat this twice? And that is what's going to come in the next Rashi. Rashi in the next section is talking about verse 17. The first Rashi on our page was about verse 14. The next Rashi is about verse 17.
Here, Scripture warns against vexing by words, wounding a person's feelings, that one should not annoy his fellow man, nor give him an advice which is unfitted for him, but is in accordance with the plan and the advantage of the advisor. But lest you should say, who knows whether I had any intention to do him evil? Scripture therefore states, but thou shalt fear thy God. He who knows men's thoughts, he knows it. In all cases where it is a matter of conscience, more literally, a matter handed over to the heart, when no one knows the truth except the one who has the thought in his heart. Scripture always states, but be afraid of thy God.
And this was a notion that we went through last week as well. And here we're seeing it now in another context. The idea that with this extra line of you will fear the Lord your God, then we are reminded that even for things that we can come up with an acceptable public excuse, God knows what our actual intention is. And Rashi, based off the rabbinic literature, is using this to talk about wronging people verbally, because if you look at the verse, there's no other context. The verse 14 has a very clear context about buying and selling, but verse 17 has no context about buying, selling, or anything else. And so the rabbis were deducing by its lack of context that this must be something that didn't involve the buying or selling, but yet could still create the same results, could still create a wronging of an oppression of another person. Make sense? Maybe? All right. But this notion that what we say matters as much as the money that we transact still seems a little strange, which is why from Proverbs, from Mishle, we have a quote, hopefully to drive the point home. Yep.
Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and they that indulge it shall eat the fruit thereof.
All right, a rather odd little saying, life and death in the power of tongue. But we're going to get a number of texts from our sages that try to explain and bring this out of what we're talking about. So first from Ben Sira.
Ben Sira says, if you blow on a spark, it will glow. If you spit on it, it will be put out, and both come out of your mouth.
Right? My mouth can both extinguish fire as well as inflame it. Still the same organ, it's just how I'm using it that makes the difference. Rabbi Yanai similarly says,
Rabbi Yanai said, if there was a piece of bread which was tevel, and he ate it before he separated off ties, then it is death via the tongue. If he separated off ties and then ate it, it is life via the tongue.
Right, so if you eat something that has not been tithed, then you are literally stealing from God and the community, and therefore you are killing yourself by eating this piece of bread. On the other hand, if you eat a piece of bread that is perfectly fine and appropriate for you to now eat, then you are sustaining yourself by this piece of bread. the same object at different times or used in different ways can make an entirely different effect on the individual. And so too Rabbi Chia bar Abba.
Rabbi Chia bar Abba said, if he had a basket of figs, if he ate them before he separated off ties, then it is death via the tongue. If he separated off ties and then ate it, it is life via the tongue.
All right, so this notion that life and death is in the tongue, the rabbis have made some nice analogies, but analogies are well and good. Stories are always better. And so we're going to get a nice story about Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel.
Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel said to Tavi, his servant, "Go, purchase for me good food from the market." He went and bought for him a tongue. He said to him, "Purchase for me bad food from the market." So he went out and bought him a tongue. He said to him,
Tavi, by the way, if you don't know the stories of Tavi, he is a slave, a servant that is noted for being especially astute and very wise. So there are many stories about Tavi displaying exceptional wisdom, and this is one of them.
So he said to him, "What is this? When I told you to get good food, you buy me a tongue. And when I told you to get bad food, you buy me tongue."
Now, pause real quick. We can understand, I hope, that this is Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel's rhetorical flourish. Because who would ask the person to go buy bad food? And that's not the usual shopping list.
Right.
So clearly he was testing Tavi's wisdom and seeing what he would come up with. And now he is saying, almost in mock shock, "What is this? You bought me the same thing, even though I said good and I said bad." And now Tavi's going to explain what he...
Tavi says to him, "Well, good comes from it and bad comes from it. When it is good, there is none better than it. And when it is bad, there is no worse than it."
Which is an extremely perceptive statement, that the damage and the wounds and the wronging that can come from the tongue, there is nothing like it for the amount of suffering and misery and pain that it can cause.
A tongue can be used to inflict pain, searing words, or to build up and to offer comfort.
Exactly right. And often the comfort or the words of support or of praise or of help that comes via the tongue, there's nothing comparable in the physical world. Exactly the right words at the right time that will do us the most good compared to anything else. And Tavi makes that very clear. All right, one more story about tongues.
Rabbi made a feast for his students. He brought before them tender tongues and tough tongues.
It's a bit of a tongue twister, I know.
They began to choose for themselves the tender tongues and left alone the tough tongues. He said to them, "Note what you are doing. Just as you are choosing the tender tongues and leaving alone the tough ones, so shall your own tongues be. So shall you be, each to one another."
All right, so among his students, he wanted to make sure that they were tender with one another. And he was making it very clear that if everybody had a choice of what tongue they would have to experience, we would all choose the tender, the soft, the kind, the pleasant. We wouldn't go for the tough. So why is it when we talk that we don't always act in that same way? Why is it that oftentimes we will lash someone with a tough tongue of criticism or of anger or of belittlement or of other types of insults? Any ideas? Why is it that we're so easy to use our tongue roughly?
Because it's so easy.
It is.
It's such an easy temptation to just...
But what's the temptation? What do we feel we gain by using our tongues this way?
By putting someone else down, you gain stature, you gain face. Everybody needs someone to look down upon.
Exactly right. So you mean by using our tongue in this way, we're oppressing someone, right? By using our tongue in this way, we are pushing them down in order that we can elevate ourselves. And it's precisely for the same reason that people would lie and cheat or deceive or dissemble when it came to business transactions, because I gain when you lose. And when you look at conversation or social interaction as being a zero-sum game like a business, then you are going to be in the same trouble that you would be if you looked at business as a zero-sum game where every time you can cheat, you win. By the way, business is technically not a zero-sum game, despite the fact that many people treat it that way. Right? It should always be a positive sum where both buyer and seller are better off than if neither had engaged in the transaction. And so too should be our conversation. But unfortunately, that competitive side of us, that innate fearful part of us that wants more from me now because who knows if I'll have more later, both in business and in social interactions, will often deal more harshly than is advisable for the long-term good of the person and the long-term good of the group. And that's why the rabbis were very, very clear that this type of wronging was something that needed every bit as much caution as the wronging that came from taking money from someone. And partly because it's a lot easier to cheat someone with your tongue than it is to cheat them with their wallet. So from Bava Metzia, we have a very famous and very important section of the rabbis outlining will violate this mitzvah.
When scripture says, and if you sell anything to your neighbor or acquire anything from your neighbor, you shall not wrong one another, verse 14, it has covered wrongs committed against property.
Which is why Rashi, in his commentary, said that first verse, verse 14, was about property wronging.
Then to what may I refer the verse? You will not wrong one another,
Which is
verse 17.
Right.
It can refer only to wrongs committed by acts of speech.
All right. So the terms that are used in the text for this are ona'a b'devarim and ona'a b'mamon. Right. That you have oppression with mammon, with money, and you have oppression with devarim, with words, and that we are equally commanded to avoid both categories of action. The mammon, the money, is better known. But let's take a look at examples of the devarim, what it means to wrong them with speech.
Such as, if one was a penitent, one may not say to him, remember your earlier deeds.
Well, why not? Right? I mean, isn't that praise? Notice they're not starting off with insults. They're not starting off with angering words. They're starting off with a word of salutation. Look, here's a guy that used to be a drunken, gambling womanizer, and now he is a great man.
Remember how you used to dress, and now look at it. It's a judgment.
Mm-hmm.
It's leading with the spirit of judgment versus kindness.
By using that contrast, you're absolutely right. You're setting up a framework of judgment. Of course, you're also setting yourself up in the position of judge, which we all enjoy that position more than being judged. And there's also a way that this is a compliment that cheats the recipient.
Right, well, you're exposing something that he may not have wanted to expose. And that other people may not have already done.
Exactly. And by doing so, in the framework of a compliment,
Excuse me.
exactly right. You have excused it. You have made it so that it's not something that he is now permitted to be angry about. And that's perhaps the worst cheat, is because you've now created it in such a context that he can't even object to it. So he's trapped having you insulted him in this context. And that is like cheating someone out of their money, because they have no redress for fixing this problem. Or similarly,
If one was a child of proselytes, one may not say to him, remember what your ancestors used to do? If he was a proselyte who has come to study the Torah, one may not say to him, look who's coming to study Torah, which was given by the mouth of the Almighty. This one who ate carrion and tariff meat abominations and creeping things.
Right? So, again, they're compliments, right? You're not allowed to be angry. I mean, look at this guy. He used to be a non-Jew who was out there eating the most horrible, horrible things in the world, but now he keeps kosher. Isn't that amazing how far he's come? Why are you angry, right? I'm saying that you're great. I mean, look at this guy. His ancestors used to worship idols. And now here he is having his bar mitzvah, right? Would that be a good bar mitzvah speech for the rabbi to give? Not so much. But couldn't we imagine someone saying that? Maybe not a rabbi, I hope, but couldn't we imagine someone saying, you know, Mazel Tov on your bar mitzvah? It's hard to believe that, you know, your grandmother had converted, you know, and used to worship idols because you are just such a fine Jew. Couldn't we imagine someone saying that? Maybe even not maliciously, just foot in mouth. That someone would see them and they would remember the past and they would think that somehow they were paying a compliment by giving this contrast of now to the past. And they wouldn't think that this is objectionable, which is why the sages have to spell out for us it's objectionable, right? Because most of us, I think, would agree. If I sell it to you for 500 and it's only worth 25, that's objectionable and that should be remedied and you shouldn't have done it in the first place. Whereas these types of phrases, many of us might say them without having even thought they were objectionable, which makes it much harder to prevent, for us to repent, to acknowledge that what we did was wrong, and to seek to give an apology from the person that we have wronged. We're going to say something, or
No,
onward?
I think the next one I was looking at.
Go for it.
If ailments affected someone or afflictions came upon him, child.
You know, which is one of the most horrible things for a parent to have to do, is to bury one of their children.
One should not speak to him in the manner in which Job's friends spoke to him. Is not your fear of God your confidence, and the integrity of your
help restore his faith in God. But by restoring his faith in God's justice, by having this cartoonish version of justice, hearing it. And again, well-meaning people will often say words of comfort that are no comfort. I often try to remind people that at the time of a death is not when you tell the person they're in a better place. God needed another angel more than you needed your child. No parent actually takes comfort at the moment of the loss of their child by hearing something like that. Maybe at some point down the line, when their grief is not quite so raw and exposed, they themselves may come to such a conclusion and such a sense of comfort. And foist, let alone telling someone, well, you know, did you check your mezuzahs? As though somehow that was the reason that their child had died of cancer. It isn't helping, and more importantly, it is a cheat, because you are acting as a friend, but what you are doing is hurtful. And now the person is not even able to deal with you in the honest way they would deal with someone who wasn't a friend and who was just behaving reprehensibly.
Which is why our sages tell us when you ship a house or comforting someone, don't say anything.
Keep your full mouth shut.
Let them talk.
Right.
And let them lead the conversation.
And the one thing that we are given to say, Hamakom Yenachem, right, is may the ever-present God comfort you among all who mourn in Zion and Jerusalem. It is a beautiful phrase, well-tailored, and it gives you something to say, without opening the door for you to say something stupid. And really, if you ever want to have the proof of the wisdom of our sages, just that alone should be enough to make you realize how amazing their insight into human nature was.
I have no words for how you must feel.
Right.
Yeah, well, obviously, so shut up.
I gave a devar at a Shiva house on that topic. And afterwards, someone came up to me, not one of the mourners, but another member of the Shiva who were there. And they thanked me for reminding people not to say stupid things, but to just, be there and available and to talk with the person as they needed to be talked. And because they said that they had lost a son, a teenager, and at their Shiva, and this is literally what they told me, and said, I know how you feel. I just lost my dog.
Oh.
And the person said, what are you supposed to say to someone like that? It's just, she said, it's just stunning that someone would ever equate the two. And, obviously what the person was trying to do was build a bond of sympathy, right? If I can commiserate, I want you to know that I'm here because I know how bad it is because I've also suffered loss. But when the losses are so different, it becomes an insult. And again, it doesn't have to be done with malice. It can just be done with stupidity. And you are still causing damage. The same way that you could cheat someone in a business deal simply by being incompetent. That doesn't mean that you've the responsibility, once you realize your error, from fixing it. It's like, oh, wow, I made an extra $500 off that guy because I added up the numbers wrong on the invoice and he and I didn't notice it. Good for me, I'll keep the money. No, you still have to fix it. It's still wrong. If you did it on purpose, but it's still something that needs to be fixed. All right, onward.
If there were ass drivers seeking wine and oil, one should not say to them, go to so-and-so who has never sold wine or oil.
Right, the great give directions to someone when you don't actually know what you're talking about. Yeah. Oh yeah, you just keep going, right? You shy. You need to. Yeah, well, right. Oh, it happened to all of us. Right? And luckily, Israel's small enough that it usually will work out. You'll hit a border or you'll find what you want. But giving someone bad advice is worse than giving no advice. Right? It's still deceiving. It's still deceptive because now you've got some goodwill from these people. You've gotten the thanks from these people, and all you've done is waste their time. Or perhaps even worse, if by the time they get to where the real sellers are, there's maybe nothing left. It may be a big monetary loss for them as well. Onward.
Rav Judah says, one should also not examine a piece of goods knowing he has no money. For lo, this is a matter known only to the heart. And of whatever is known only to the heart, it is written, and you will fear your God.
As we just read. So this is, I think, one of the hardest things for people to hold themselves back from. So, right, I can't go shopping. Read his words carefully, right? If knowing you have no money, that's the operative word there. If you know that you might buy a car, it's fine to go to the car lot and to ask for a test drive and try to make up your mind and see whether or not it's worth it. Even if you think the chances are small, you can go to the sales room and have the person show you the product and give you the lecture and tell you about it. And if you end up buying it, great. And if you walk out of the store because you've decided it's not worth the money that you have because you've only just got enough and you'd rather wait, you haven't done anything wrong. But if you decide that the best way to spend your time is to walk in and out of shops, knowing you have no money and you will not buy anything, then absolutely you are deceiving the shop owner. Right? You are a deceptive buyer. And it is not fair. And it doesn't matter whether the shop owner was already going to be there. It doesn't matter that you're not losing them money. It matters that you have deceived them simply by your actions in how you engaged in that relationship. And I know it's hard for some of us who like doing some shopping and all of that, but you have to be at least potentially able to buy. Hanging out at the Lamborghini dealer.
So if I go to Best Buy and want to see TV demonstrated, no, I'm not going to buy it online.
Yes. So again, if you
Best Buy is never the Best Buy.
well, they have some sales sometimes, right? And if there's a chance that when you go, you will buy from them, that's fine. But let's imagine a different scenario, not just I'm going to buy online. Let's imagine you have the Amazon gift card. Money you have for your TV is definitely already set to be from this other company. Then absolutely, going to Best Buy to see the TVs and have the guy walk you through what the different features are, knowing that in your pocket was an Amazon gift card and that was what was going to be used for your TV, that is absolutely forbidden. If you're going to them and giving them a fair chance, letting them compete, they show you their TVs and, you know, it's only $20 more than Amazon and I can take it home today. If that's something that you're willing to entertain, then by all means walk in and let them make their sales pitch.
But what if you have the Amazon gift card and you walk and you say, could you do me a favor?
Mhm.
Could you show me a TV I'm going to buy from Amazon, but this is the only place I can see this? And
No. Even if they say yes, no.
okay.
Right? The same way that you're not allowed to slap you or knock out your teeth. Right? You're not allowed to. You can't absolve someone of damaging you simply because you say it's okay. Right? Oh no, please! I want you to cut off my hand. Right? The person who cuts off your hand is still guilty of attacking you, even if it was with your permission. So too for this. The salesman. Well, I know he said that. A shot. Right? I'm sure I can convince him otherwise, and I'll just try this technique, or I'll spend more time, or I'll be very into that. No matter how much you say it, that's not how salespeople are going to look at the relationship. So no, if there's a chance to buy it from them, absolutely. Even if it's like a 2% chance, no problem. But if it's 0, then no, you're not allowed to use their facilities, their times, or just deceive their expectations. Because remember, we're talking about feelings here. We're not even talking about material damage. This isn't about I've robbed them of something. This is about I have taken from their feelings. And that's why it is Devarim Shebelev. It's a matter that is in the heart. And that's why it is between us and God, knowing our intentions. Because the shop owner doesn't know how much money I have in my pocket or what my real intentions are. I know, and God knows. And that should be the measure of what we're doing.
But do find one.
Please. I know you're looking for a TV, right?
Beautiful. What if you don't ask the salesman? And you just go into the store and you look at this, it says don't examine the goods.
Exactly.
Okay, never mind.
Exactly. So even without the salesman interfering. Now, the more interesting question in the contemporary world is, does this mean I'm not allowed to go online and look at something because I'm using I'm examining the merchandise there? Most of the resources I've read say no, that doesn't count. That you're not actually examining the merchandise physically. You're just looking at information, digital bytes and bits, and therefore you're not deceiving the store by looking up information online.
But perhaps you're deceiving yourself.
You might be. You might be. All right, we got a couple minutes left. I want to get just our last little bits here.
Would you help me with the names on this next one?
Rabbi Yochanan?
Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai?
Yes.
Said Rabbi Yochanan in the name of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Far more common is fraud in spoken words than fraud in matters of property. For of the former it is written, and you shall fear your God. But that is not said of the latter.
Right, verse 14, we didn't get the phrase, fear of the Lord your God. Right? Because from verse 14, when we're talking about property, most of us fear the Lord our neighbor. The guy who, once he discovers we've cheated him, is going to come after us to get the money back. But when it comes to wronging someone with words, there is usually no earthly recourse for fixing this. Again, remember, they're looking at levels of wronging someone that go beyond insulting them. Excuse me. They're looking at a level of deception which can't always be noticed by the person who has been cheated, which is further exacerbated by Rabbi Eliezer and Rav Shmuel Bar Nachmani. They have their own take about why this is worse.
And Rabbi Eliezer says, this is done to the person and the other only to the property.
Right? If you cheat someone on a business deal, I've only damaged the property. If I cheat you with my words, I've hurt you. And we all know that damage to a person is much worse than damage to property.
Rav Samuel Bar Nahmani said, this can be made up, but that cannot be made up.
Right? If I cheat you out of $500, I can give you the $500. If I cheat you in these words, I can apologize, but I can never
Undo.
exactly. I can't quite fix precisely what I did with my words. There's no easy physical way to close that gap between what I said and what I meant. And that means that before we open our mouth, we have to be even more careful than before we open our wallets. And with my platypus going in my pocket, we'll leave it there for today.
Thank you.